Welcome to the Equity Plus podcast from CareShare Health Alliance. I'm your host, Erin Story, Director of Communications here at CareShare. In this episode, we'll hear a conversation between our Director of Innovation and Capacity Building, Jalah Clayton, and Kenya Joseph of Heart and Hands Food Pantry, located in Mecklenburg County, about the unique approach the organization takes to addressing food insecurity in their community.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Equity Plus podcast. I'm super excited to be joined this afternoon by Mrs. Kenya Joseph of Hearts and Hands Food Pantry here in Charlotte, North Carolina. As we get to know a little bit more about the work that she does with Hearts and Hands Food Pantry and in our food system here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. So Kenya, I would love if you could introduce yourself, your role and mission at Hearts and Hands Food Pantry, and then we'll get into the questions.
Thank you so much for having me. Actually, I'm the president of Hearts and Hands Food Pantry, and I'm one of the co-founders. And our mission is simple. Our mission is food is a basic human right. And from that, we kind of have our visioning statement of ministering to the body and soul of people. So for us, what that means is it's not just about giving out a food box and walking away. We really try to walk alongside folks who are in crisis and experiencing food insecurity and needing help. We do our very best to connect them to additional resources. We follow up with them and kind of go through whatever's happening for them with them. We have been in existence now for, 6+ years. We serve over 2,000 people a month, and it has been such a journey.
I can only imagine what the 6+ years have looked like, and just knowing personally how much you all have grown. I know it's been a super exciting, albeit roller coaster of a journey. With your role as president and co-founder, can you tell me a little bit more about what went into founding the food pantry? What was the initial conversations where you kind of decided this is what I need to do and this is what we need to start here in Charlotte?
Our founding story is hilarious and almost unbelievable. So my professional background is quite varied and is not at all in the nonprofit space. I was in luxury goods for years and years in finance. And I pursued a childhood dream, actually, and retired when I was 30 to become a scientist, which I did. And so when I was on sabbatical from applying to PhD programs, I was hanging out with my mom. It was holiday season. It was that dead time right after New Year's where no one knows what day it is or what time it is. And we were watching this show that neither of us had ever seen anything like this before. So the show was about extreme couponing. So we kind of got caught up watching this little marathon. And the episode that we were watching, there was a family who the entire family was into it. The parents, there were 3 kids. It was the whole family was doing this. And what it came out to be was it just wasn't this family was trying to save money and just fill their basement with random things. They actually were doing this because their neighbor down the street, who the children were friends with and were close to, the father had lost his job. And so this family took it upon themselves to learn how to do this, make it effective, and then execute it to where they could provide all of this stuff to that family in need to give them a break while the father was looking for work. And so as we were watching this, at the same time, my mom and I turned to each other and we were like, wow, we can do this. And then it was why just one family then? And so the question for us immediately became, well, what did that look like? And I said to her, well, I think it's a food pantry. And we were like, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? So we started just looking stuff up immediately and started Googling right then and there. Her and I were part of a pretty big church here in Charlotte at the time. And so we were like, it's like you hear that moment, God cuts through and you're like, you got to do this.
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, well, let's go to our church and see what we can do. So we went to our church actually. And what's interesting from that point on is our church was actually not into this. To be perfectly honest, they were not into it. They were very kind of standoffish about it and didn't want to pursue it. And so we just were very dogged about it and did not give up, and we persevered. And finally we opened on Easter And they had literally allocated us on this massive church campus. I'm not even kidding, a closet. Like it was this literal size of a closet. And so we opened on March, and it was just for people who needed help in the congregation, because again, the congregation was quite large at the time. But within a few weeks, we started, you start with one family, then 5 families, and it started growing very quickly. And so we knew that we were on the right track of like, yes, people need this. In that same time as we were just getting started, we were also having a lot of conversations with community members about food insecurity in general, of course, but also, what their experiences have been with other services in our area. And so we got earfuls of information from people, and we took all of it to heart, because the goal was, if we're going to do this, we don't want to just do the same thing that's always been done. That obviously is not effective if people are still so food insecure, right? And we're hearing kind of these horror stories of people's experiences at other places. And we were like, okay, so we're going to start building out how we're going to do this to be the anti of that, the opposite of that, to be better than that. And that's really how we started. And then we were in the church closet for about 5 months or so. The relationship between us and the church got worse and worse and worse. They were really not trying to support this. So I was like, I'm filing our own corporate papers today. We are going independent from them, because originally we were under their 501c3. We were like, nope, got to do this ourselves. And so I started that process, and we got our 501c3, and we left the church and shut down. And we shut down for like about 6 weeks to find our own commercial space, which we did in Huntersville. And we were in that space up until 2 weeks ago, which is crazy to even say that. So that's how we started.
Yeah. And so, okay, so as you're saying, with the facility that we've transitioned into about 2 weeks ago, as you reflect on the journey of moving into a new space and the pantry growing from the church closet to where you are now, how do you ensure that like the daily operations and, y'all strategic plan, how do you ensure that that stays aligned with the core beliefs around food being a basic human right, and around, the core beliefs that like shaped what you're doing now at the time of founding the organization?
That's easy for us. So our founding board has been expanded in our growth through this last 6 years, but everyone on our founding board is still very much involved. Awesome. And has a direct impact on making sure that we are always aligned in what we're doing. It's actually been really easy to stick to, our mission, especially around strategic planning. Like it's such a non-negotiable that it does, like we don't even think about it. And there is a straightforwardness to what we do that makes it easy as well. We're here to catch or try to catch folks who are falling through the gaps. We're trying to get to folks before they completely lose everything. And so that's the space that we work in every single day. And that means that, we have to operate at a certain level. We have to serve with excellence every day, but it also means that we have to be really strong advocates for our community and for people who cannot advocate for themselves. That's a big part of this work too. It's community care. It really is about just making sure that people are taken care of. It goes deeper than just a perfunctory service. And we've always operated that way. From the day we started, we didn't have visit limits, because that was the biggest complaint we had heard from the community. They're like, yeah, we can go to these other pantries, but they tell us that we can only use the service 7 times a year. So what happens if you are now disabled? What happens if you've been diagnosed with cancer? What happens if you lose your home? That's not necessarily going to be resolved quickly. And what happens when you can't have that bit of support when you're going through stuff like that? So we started off not having, service limits, which we still don't have to this day. We started off as a full choice pantry where people could pick what they wanted from day one. That has not changed either. And so when you look at things like COVID that happened, all we had to do was pivot. It still maintained our core service, but in fact, in ways we improved it because we knew we had to step up and manage the increased volume. Now we have, for what we do, we have a volume that we had never had before. Like the volume that we have now is insane, but it is a testament to what is happening in our country, what is happening in our world, what people are experiencing versus what we're being told in the media and the news about how things are. People are really struggling right now, and we are committed to stand in that gap. So that's what we do.
So could you discuss what strategies or how y'all go about engaging with the local community, or how you go about building partnerships to further your mission? And I think too, maybe a sub question to that too, like how do you ensure that as you're pursuing partnerships, it's in alignment with the way that your pantry operates?
So that process for us has evolved a lot over time. We were relatively self-contained up until 2020. And that wasn't necessarily intentional. It's just that we were small and we were growing and we were focused solely on providing the best service that we could. We had a really fantastic partner that we kind of started out with when we were doing our research in terms of like more so the organization, nonprofit structure. Because remember, like between my mom and I as the founders, we have together over 45 years of high level business experience. But again, that's like super corporate, big business. Like that's the backgrounds that we come from. So this being in a nonprofit space was like, well, what is this like? And what is this really? And so we reached out to a partner in our area who also did food work, completely different from what we were doing though. And at the time, their founder was still very involved in the day-to-day. She's since retired a few years ago, but she was so gracious. She was such a mentor to us in come and tour my facility. Let me explain to you how we got started. Let me explain to you the struggles that we've had and how we've navigated. She was such a resource. And from there, like I said, we were self-contained until 2020 hit. And one of the things that kind of changed partnership for us was we didn't close during COVID, not one day. A lot of places, a lot of nonprofits and service providers closed immediately because nobody knew what was going on. We were like, we're not closing. We are going to pivot our service. We're going to work extra hard. We're going to do whatever we have to do. And so through that decision, people started coming to us. And then that became understanding the necessity for researching who you're talking to, research the organization, find out what people are saying if you can. You can't always, but find out what their mission is, find out what they do, how many people they serve, what their priorities are. And I mean, now we have probably I'd say we probably have about 60 different partners that are like for real regular partners as opposed to kind of one-off things. And we partner also a lot with even a lot of unincorporated kind of nonprofit community groups. And that's that's a lifeline. Right. I think that not in the nonprofit world, people get to a certain size and it's like they kind of look down their nose at grassroots organizations, but that's who we are and that's how we started, so we're always working with those folks because they're the direct communication. If you don't have the resources to go directly into the community and say, go door to door and say, what do you need? Your community partnerships is going to be where you get your best information. And so we always stay, I don't know, I can't speak to how big we might get one day, but no matter what that looks like, we're always going to be in that space. We're grassroots first, always. That's just what it is. Really, partnerships is just connecting with people. And that, to a certain degree, comes naturally to me. It's not to say that we don't have a strategy per se, but it's more so we center the authenticity of it as opposed to what somebody can do for me or vice versa, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And I love what you said around, just prioritizing and I think, nurturing those grassroots partnerships and grassroots relationships, because I would wholeheartedly agree, just operating more in the systems change space. I feel like for a lot of like system decision makers, or like you were saying, larger nonprofits that tend to have something more similar to corporate structure, it's easy to see where you lose sight of that and then become kind of out of touch with what the community actually needs. So to have those trusted community relationships, I think it just makes such a difference in building trust in the communities that you're trying to impact, and not just coming in there with like you're going to wave a magic wand and fix everyone's issues. No, it starts with making genuine, like you said, authentic relationships and asking people what they need and actually listening. With that being said, are there any like specific, particularly successful community initiatives that you'd like to highlight, either with it being a big year for you all, whether this year or things that you have coming up? Anything that you'd like to highlight that you feel, really, really encapsulates the growth and the successes that you all have experienced?
We've had some major wins this year across the board. We picked up a major piece of funding early this year, and part of the stipulations of that funding is that we have to do a whole lot of reporting every month, and that is arduous and tedious, but the success of our organization really comes from how we leverage technology too. So we had our own data management system and keeping track of clients and what's happening for them and updating that and all that kind of stuff. So we had an idea in our head, we weren't checking it every day, but we had an idea in our head of like, okay, this is how many people you're serving. But I'm still out there many a day that we have service actively, even being the president, putting food in people's cars. We are not separate from the service. And so we're just doing what we do. And so when we really started digging into that reporting for this particular funding that we had to fulfill, to actually see like, wow, like you are over 2,000 individuals a month. It is unreal because it doesn't feel like it when you're doing it. A big win this year that we had is we really expanded. So we have 2 core services. Well, really now 3. We have our pickup service. We have our delivery service. And last year I started a service called Mobile Pantry. And it was successful last year when we started it too. But this is the first year it's been like, we're doing it constantly. It's big, and it's getting bigger. And so now we're at a place where we're getting new partner requests for it. So it's also like tells us, okay, the word is out. Like we've made some impressions in this service that we're doing and how we do it. And so that was a big accomplishment this year. Another thing that we have coming up that's big is it's our 3rd annual toy drive for holiday for Christmas is coming. We're starting to get prepared for that now. We do a huge all-day distribution of toys, and we don't do used anything. So I want to put that caveat in as I describe this because I want people to understand the scope of this. And so even in our food services, we don't take expired food. We don't give out expired food. Everything is brand new, in date, original packaging for us. And so we do the same thing with toy drive. So to have a huge successful toy drive where we're giving toys that are all brand new wrapped is a huge thing. And so we're starting to work on that. Now we're a little bit late on working on that this year, with being that we're all, about to be in November. And the reason for that is because one of the biggest wins we had this year was our new facility that we just moved into a couple of weeks ago. And it came out of strife, which is crazy. So it's really an example of a burden turning into a blessing. So where we were located, our previous facility is in Huntersville, and there's so much real estate development going on there right now. And we had been in the Huntersville space since we left the church way back when we started. And we had always had a decent relationship with our landlord, never had any issues. And then he comes to us in May. And he's like, well, there's all this development in Huntersville and they're building a new apartment complex just a couple blocks away. I think I can get 3 times the amount on your space. Okay. Then he says, well, I've told the tenants upstairs that they have to leave too. I'm going to do some work in the building and rent it out again. So he never even gave us the option to stay. So we were like, dude, like, what is happening right now,
Yeah.
And we managed to kind of hold him off throughout the summer as we started looking for new spaces. The thing about it that was so crazy, and people quickly found out about this, and even Huntersville town government found out about it because we have a great relationship with them, and we had to go to them and say, look, we're having this problem and we need a new space and we'd like to stay in Huntersville. But our landlord wanted to, for real, literally, I did the math. He wanted to increase our rent by 200%. With no improvements or anything to this space that we were in, which by that point was a very weathered space. We had been there for 6 years, and it was not a finished space even when we moved in there. And so we were looking at commercial spaces. And of course, now for the space that we would need, even just a small upgrade of our space would have been very expensive. So, we're hearing at the same time we're trying to figure it out financially. And every space we looked at that could have been perfect, or what felt like it was perfect at the time, fell through over silly, ridiculous reasons. It was never, oh, we can't afford this, or, we don't have enough money on paper, or whatever the case may be. It was always something, and it was always a runaround. That was the other interesting thing. So we had gone
like
through
some zoning stuff or
yeah, like all of a
building
sudden
code
after
stuff.
3 weeks of negotiations, they're like, oh, well, we can't have food on site. And it's like, but you knew what we did when we
See,
first applied. You could have just told us that,
yeah,
like stuff like that. Yeah. So
yeah.
we went through this constant dance and game for the whole summer. And I
Wow.
think it was at the end of August, our broker reached out to us and was like, hey, I have this space that I just found out about. But it's not, I don't think it's in good condition. I don't even know if I should show it to you. And I was like, do you have pictures? Just show it to me. Because we're at this point now, we're getting desperate. Our landlord is now actively starting to act up. He came and put a lock on the garage. Like we had to call the police. It was a whole thing. So I'm like, whatever we
Oh
have to look at
my
this point, we'll
goodness.
do. So the space that we now are in, when we saw the pictures, our board and our staff were like, no, this is horrible, because like the building had not been occupied for 8 years. It was in bad shape. Everything was falling apart. And my thing was, is this a cosmetic issue or is this structural? Because cosmetic can be fixed, but structural is expensive and now a different ballgame. And so our broker was like, I don't know. And he was like, do you want to see it? So I was like, we'll see it. So the first time that we got to see it, I personally didn't even get to go. I had conflict in my scheduling. I couldn't go. The rest of my board went, and they told me that it was crazy. It smelled awful. It was like a crime scene. There was no electricity. Like the walls were broken, all this crazy stuff. And my thing was, well, okay, but what is it if they're willing to fix it, the owners? So I went there to see it myself and saw the same things that my team had reported back to me. And I was like, okay, I see that we need paint, we need this, we need that. Okay, fine. But like, what does that really mean? So what blew us away was the location and the size of the space. This space, and because he had listed it really cheap. So now we're like, okay, so who died here, right?
Right. What happened?
Right. But the space is massive, like unbelievable, beyond our wildest expectations and dreams for what we were trying to move into. So I'm like, what does this mean? And at first, when we had our broker ask the owner, like, hey, like, what would happen to repair this place? Originally, the owner was like, he wanted whatever tenant that was going to come in to repair it themselves. And I was like, okay, so we have to consider that type of budget in, what we're trying to do. That's a whole thing. But when our broker came back and said, do you want to do an official application? I was like, let's just do it and let's see what happens. And so in that application, of course, it talks, it tells you who we are and what we do. And so he submits that. And the next day the owner comes back and he's like, I'll pay to fix it. We'll work it out. What? And we were like, what is going on? And so we find out from our broker that the landlord, the owner, so he has a whole massive company, right? That owns this property. But he lives out of state, and where he lives, he is actively involved in food bank work.
Wow.
So he understands what we do. So he was like, I'm going to help you. Like, absolutely. And so we got the space. We were able to kind of negotiate down the price a little bit, but our space is insane. Like we have over 7,000 square feet. And that also fulfills a vision that we have going forward, because being in this work for these many years now and seeing and experiencing and hearing from everyone about what's happening in food insecurity here in Mecklenburg County, we had a vision to be, okay, we understand the importance of being an independent food pantry that operates in a certain way, different from other people, right? We understand now the importance of that with all of our partners of operating a food bank the same way. So for us, the vision expanded and was like, okay, we're going to transition this thing over time, not immediately, but we're going to transition and grow into the first independent food bank in this area. So this space coming along just like solidified all of that and was like, oh yeah, you're doing that. So that was a huge win this year. And then the other big win that we had this year, which is just unfathomable. It's like I don't think about it often because of where we are now and we're just in it, but like it is actually pretty amazing. So in, I want to say April, we were able to hire one of our clients. And now both him and his wife work for us. What happened was the client is undocumented, not anymore, but he was. and we had been supporting their family for a while. And we got invited to be part of the DoorDash Project Dash, where they do a reduced cost for deliveries to your clients for you. So we had been in that program for a couple of months. And then one day I ordered some DoorDashes for some of our clients, and my client showed up to drive. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you drove DoorDash. And he's like, it's the only thing that I can really do because of my status right now. And my wife is home with the baby, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, wait a second. I'm like, I'm like, for real? I'm like, what are they paying you? Like, what do you get paid to do DoorDash? And so he showed me everything. And I was like, we can pay you more than that. That's ridiculous. I'm like, come work for us and we will really take care of you. And so we were able to hire him. He's our first staff driver. He's amazing. A couple of months later, he reached out to me about his wife, and he was like, he was like, you don't understand. She's incredible. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, so in our country, she was a software developer and a software engineer, and she's super smart. And, and I had met her before a few times. So like, I already got that vibe of something more there. And so he brought her in to meet with me, and I hired her as my Spanish speaking case manager. And she has been phenomenal. It's the best thing I ever could have done, like, honestly. And like, that's the kind of, if, you never really feel like you've made it, so to speak, like that's not the vibe. But like at the same time, if you think about, I've built something to a point where it has created livelihood for someone else.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's a feeling. And especially for it to not just be livelihood for somebody random, but to be livelihood for somebody that I know was struggling because I was helping them through their struggle to begin with. That's huge. And so that, I think, is probably the accomplishment we are most proud of this year. And we hope to be able to do more of that as we get bigger. Like we have, you start some clients you form real tight relationship with. And so if there is something that they can handle or they can do, we have the budget space or whatever to be able to do it. Why not? This is how you pour back. This is how you pour back into the community.
And build it up, build it up from community first, community led. I guess a question for, for other community-based organizations that might be listening, how do you go about, building up the volunteer base that you have that is so committed and dedicated to the mission? And how do you go about keeping your volunteers engaged? What does that process look like for you all?
So I want to say first that we have been very, very blessed because it is difficult and I still don't necessarily have the formula. We have core volunteers that have been with us for a long time who really, they embody our mission and we can rely on them, right? But the truth of the matter, in full honesty, is that we've also been burned. Getting volunteers who are legitimate is one of the most difficult things for a service-based nonprofit. And at first, when you're just building up and you're focused on what you're doing, you don't really, you don't think about that. Because at first, you're like, well, why would somebody want to come and volunteer anyway? Like, of course they get it. You know what I mean? That's like the assumption. And then sometimes you get people and they come in and you're like, what is happening?
With ulterior motives. Yeah.
Right. And we've experienced a lot of that. Like one of the things that we're actually going through right now while we are still getting up to speed in our new space is completely revamping our volunteer sign up, if you will. Now, having been doing this for so long, we've learned a lot. And now it's like, okay, you want to volunteer with us, you have to apply. The same way that you apply for a job, you have to apply. We have to make sure that you are doing this for the right reasons, that you understand what's happening. Because also, too, one of the challenges with food is that people volunteer other places that are like big operations and they're used to like, oh, I volunteered for 2 hours and I was on the assembly line packing apples. That's not what we do. And getting people to understand that's not what we do and that's not how we operate is challenging. So we're changing the whole like right now, honest, like all my volunteer slots, I've closed everything, even though we need volunteers right now, because we need to revamp that process to make sure that we are engaging in quality. The other challenge for us is that our organization in particular is we don't allow minors under 16. We don't allow it because of the liability. Our work is very fast paced. There is a physical aspect to what we do. We don't have a type of space where you can have kids standing with their mom at a table. We don't have that kind of setup. Right. And even getting that across is difficult, especially where our old facility was in a more affluent neighborhood, you have parents reaching out, my kid needs hours, I need to send my kid, then they're demanding about it too. And it's like, I get that your kid is 13. We are not here to babysit. We don't have time for that. And there are places that will take that. We just unfortunately cannot, based on how we're set up. So I can't say that I've learned the secret yet. We're trying something new that we're about to deploy, and we hope that it's going to make a huge difference, but I truly don't know. Volunteering is tricky. Volunteering is tricky across the board, because there are some people who are like with it. They're like, yes, and they get it, and this is what they want to do, and they understand. But there are also a lot of people who like the idea of helping and the idea of volunteering versus actual giving from your heart. And we see that even in how people donate goods. And then I'm sure any organization that takes physical goods donations goes through this too. You can say a million times in the nicest possible way, these are the things that we're looking for. This is what it needs to be for what we need. And people will try to violate that every single day of the week. It's hard to get the donor community to understand what of food pantries is not who we are. We do not take expired goods. We do not want your half open box of pasta that you didn't finish. We don't want your half empty shampoo bottle. And sometimes what we found is being really honest and blunt is actually better than trying to be nice and diplomatic in how you explain those things. Like sometimes you have to let people know, because it's their own perception that allows them to think that that's even okay. So as an advocate also, we have a responsibility to educate people. You wouldn't want somebody to give this to you, right? So why are you trying to give this to somebody else? We do a lot of that education, and it can be a little hairy sometimes, but it's necessary because we want the best for our clients. If it's garbage to you, don't expect somebody to pick through your garbage.
Yep, exactly. And I think this might step on a little toes, but like, I think it's so important to push back against the dominant culture around nonprofits, around like charity. I put that in quotes over here, but like that concept of viewing people as the less fortunate or as the need, any of that. No, they are a person just like you. And 9 times out of 10, I'm a strong believer, and we are one, bad situation or accident or emergency situation away from being in the shoes of those, that sometimes we're closer than we think we are to being, being in a position of like, hey, I might need some help or support or assistance from a neighbor. And why would I want to receive help that is without dignity?
It's about redefining what helping means, because I think a lot of people have gotten complacent on what that means. I was raised in a household where if you're assisting someone with something, or you're doing something for someone, you are to do that task better than you would do it for yourself. That's something that people have a hard time with, I've found. If you to help someone, the key goal is to be useful in whatever you're doing for them. And that requires more thought. That requires more consideration than a lot of people will admit that they don't give to others. So it is also an opportunity to challenge people to do and be more, and to really learn about what it means to care for your neighbor. I think people get afraid that will consume them, and then you have also the other side. You have the folks who come and volunteer, and it's like they're experiencing a trauma. I can't believe the suffering. Oh my gosh, that is the other one.
That's not
really,
what it's
really,
about. Yeah.
Right. Like that's really crazy. And we've had a few people like that. Like we've had to send people home, and it's unfortunate that that type of stuff happens, but it does. And I think even as a nonprofit, having a safe space to be honest about those challenges is useful, because as nonprofits, there's kind of this wall where we're expected to be, super pliable, amenable. Oh, yes, we'll take whatever you'll give us. And that is not how you run a successful nonprofit. A nonprofit simply means that any income you take in does not compensate the people who are running it, because it's a community resource. That's what nonprofit means. That's where the line ends in terms of how you do things. Because of the business backgrounds that we have, we run our nonprofit like a business. what's the key thing to a business? The customer is always number one and the customer is always right. So when you have that high level of customer experience that you're creating, that's where you are best serving. It's the same thing. It's just for two different reasons. So we look at our decisions as an organization in that way too. What is going to provide the best outcome for our clients? What is going to provide the best experience for them? What do we need to give to ensure that they feel taken care of? How do we extend ourselves effectively to really be a significant presence in helping them get out of whatever they're going through? Or how do we support them through something that's difficult?
In closing, Kenya, so I know you mentioned the holiday toy drive that you all have coming up. Any other future projects or anything that we can highlight? And then where can listeners learn more about Hearts and Hands Food Pantry and get connected with you all?
I would say outside of we don't do an official drive for Thanksgiving, but it is kind of a drive. So we always take what's considered to be traditional holiday food. We can definitely do it. I do want to say as a food pantry, we are also different too, because we take non-perishables as well. So we have full refrigeration and freezing capabilities. So we take turkeys and meats and fruits and juice and milk and all those things as well, and distribute those. And next year is kind of going to be full steam ahead. The need is great, and we have to continuously kind of ramp up our services. And also you'll see more of that food bank side start to pop out. Right now, we supply produce and goods to 2 atrium clinics and a atrium mobile unit, as well as a community organization. So that's 4. Next year it might be 10, and we just continue to grow it organically like that. But all of our information and connection is through our website, which is heartsandhandsfoodpantry.com. But I do want to shout out our social media, because that's on the ground real time. We're Hearts and Hands Food Pantry on Instagram and on Facebook, and now on TikTok. And we'll be putting out more kind of like direct news through there. We're trying to get better about it. It's challenge. Social media is a challenge, but we're going to get it done. But those are the easiest ways to connect with us. And yeah, we're going to keep grinding this out. There's a lot to be done, but we're convicted in our mission and our goal. Mecklenburg County is a very affluent county in comparison to other counties in North Carolina. So the rates of food insecurity and the nature of how it manifests itself in our county is terrible. Let's be blunt. And there's so much to be done there. And we're just proud to even be here to even try to make some kind of dent. Here's the thing. You got to get in the game. You can't sit on the sidelines of the problems that we have in our world. And if we inspire even one person to get off the sidelines and get in the game of whatever it is that they care about, I have done more than I expected.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I feel like that was a gem you dropped there just to leave us with. And we'll be sure to get all website links, social media handles, and everything into the show notes so that folks can get connected. And then really quickly too, if folks aren't local to Charlotte Mecklenburg, are there still ways to connect or give or donate to you all?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So all of that can be found through our website. We have kind of a donation thing set up through an Amazon wish list. So we can have donations through Amazon. We've got a lot of the stuff that we need is always updated on there. We've got all of our donation links through our site and also linked into our socials too.
Perfect. Thank you again so much, Kenya, for joining us for this episode. This was an incredible conversation. And again, too, even if one person hears this episode, and gets to spread and amplify the mission a little further, that's what we want to be able to do for you all, and uplift what y'all are doing.
I appreciate that. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Equity Plus podcast, and special thanks again to Kenya Joseph of Hearts and Hands Food Pantry for being part of today's episode. As mentioned, Hearts and Hands is currently having a holiday drive through November 30th, 2023. You can find out how to donate either in person or online by checking out this episode's show notes at caresharehelp.org/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to hear more from community leaders and community-based organizations in North Carolina about how they're working to advance health equity. To learn more about CareShare Health Alliance, visit us at caresharehelp.org, and don't forget to check out our hub for community-based organizations working to promote health equity and community voice, the Equity Plus Network, at equitypn.org. That is EQUITYPN.org. We can't wait to connect with you there.